On the evening of November 29, 1988, 30-year-old Deborah Atrops prepared to make what should have been a simple trip. After getting her hair done at a salon in Tigard, Oregon, she planned to drive to Sherwood to pick up her 8-month-old adopted daughter from her estranged husband's home. The couple had separated 6 months earlier in June, though they remained legally married. Deborah had moved to an apartment in Salem to start a new life, while Robert Elmer Atrops, then 34 years old, remained in their home on Conzelman Road. She was expected to arrive between 7:30 and 8 o'clock that evening. She never made it. When Deborah failed to arrive, Robert began making phone calls, reaching out to her acquaintances and family members, asking if anyone had heard from her. Eventually, he called the Tigard Police Department to report her missing. The following morning, on November 30th, the Washington County Sheriff's Office took an official missing person report. As part of the investigation, Deborah's vehicle, a black 1988 Honda Accord two-door, was entered into law enforcement databases as a car involved in a missing person case. Investigators began searching for any sign of the missing young mother. The answer came the next day, December 1st, 1988, at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. A city public works employee discovered an abandoned vehicle parked at the dead end of Southwest Murray Road near Southwest Shoals Ferry Road in Beaverton. The black Honda Accord sat at the edge of the woods with its driver's side window rolled down. The keys were sitting inside on the driver's seat. The license plates had been removed. On that cold December morning, the windows were frosted over from the chill. When Beaverton police officer David Blunt responded to the suspicious vehicle complaint and looked inside the trunk, he made a horrifying discovery. Deborah Atrops lay inside the trunk, her body positioned in a way that indicated she had been placed there after death. She was still wearing her blue coat and black heels, both covered with mud. An autopsy conducted on December 2nd revealed the devastating truth. Deborah had been physically assaulted and strangled to death. She was only 30 years old, a young mother whose life had been violently stolen. From the very beginning of the investigation, detectives focused their attention on Robert Atrops as the primary suspect. Those close to Deborah had witnessed troubling signs in the months leading up to her murder. Friends and co-workers had observed concerning domestic violence behavior. The couple's separation had been caused by serious marital problems, including physical abuse. People in Deborah's life had worried for her safety. She had been making plans for divorce, ready to move forward with her life and raise her daughter away from the man who had hurt her. Despite their suspicions and the mounting circumstantial evidence pointing toward Robert Atrops, investigators faced a fundamental challenge. They needed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in 1988, with the forensic technology available at that time, they simply didn't have enough concrete evidence to bring charges. Detectives worked the case for months, expending significant time and effort, interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence, and building their investigation. But by the fall of 1990, without enough proof to secure a conviction, the case went cold. The murder of Deborah Atrops remained officially unsolved for more than 3 decades. The breakthrough would finally come thanks to advances in DNA technology and a renewed commitment to solving cold cases. In 2020, the Washington County District Attorney's Office secured a federal grant called Prosecuting Cold Cases Using DNA from the United States Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. The grant, worth nearly $500,000, allowed the county to launch its cold case unit, focusing specifically on investigating and prosecuting violent crime cold cases involving identified DNA associated with a possible suspect. The unit identified approximately 40 cases dating back to the 1960s that had the potential to be solved with modern forensic techniques. The county hired Kevin Winfield, a recently retired police officer who had spent his lengthy career with the Cannon Beach and Tualatin police departments investigating homicides and other major crimes, to serve as a part-time special deputy leading the newly formed cold case unit. They also brought in a former DNA supervisor from the Oregon State Police Crime Lab as their forensic consultant. Just months into his new position, Winfield picked up the case file for Deborah Atrops' murder. Though no one had been charged at the time of the killing, detectives in 1988 had preserved DNA samples from Deborah's autopsy and clothing that could still be tested with modern technology. In May 2021, the Cold Case Unit partnered with the Washington County Sheriff's Office to restart the investigation. Over the next year and a half, Detective Winfield and his team conducted a comprehensive reinvestigation. They re-interviewed multiple witnesses, gathering new statements and perspectives that had developed over the decades. They submitted additional items for forensic analysis that hadn't been tested before, including Deborah's clothing and soil samples that had been collected at the original crime scene in 1988. The forensic results proved crucial. The Oregon State Police Crime Lab analyzed the blue coat Deborah was wearing when she was murdered. After adjusting test parameters, analysts discovered DNA evidence connecting Robert Atrops to that coat. The DNA analysis was complex, involving mixture interpretation that produced what's called a likelihood ratio. The result indicated it was 132 times more likely to see the DNA mixture found on the coat if Robert Atrops was a contributor compared to a random person. While this was technically one of the weakest positive results the lab could produce, barely above an inconclusive finding on their internal scale, it was still considered probative evidence. Additionally, the FBI laboratory examined mud samples and concluded that the mud collected from Deborah's vehicle was indistinguishable from mud collected at Robert Atrops' home. Detective Winfield also uncovered information showing that Robert had sold roofing materials at construction sites near the location where Deborah's body was found, placing him in the vicinity. In 2022, Detective Winfield interviewed Robert Atrops again. During this interview, there were significant discrepancies between his version of events and what he had told investigators back in 1988. The inconsistencies, combined with the DNA evidence and other forensic findings, gave prosecutors the ammunition they needed to finally pursue charges. On March 23, 2023, 35 years after Deborah's murder, a grand jury indicted Robert Atrops on one count of murder in the second degree. That morning, officers served a search warrant at his home in Newberg, Oregon, and took the now 70-year-old man into custody without incident. He was transported to the Washington County Jail. It was the first major arrest the Cold Case Unit had made since its formation. The case went to trial in April 2025, becoming the first cold case from the unit to go before a jury. Over the course of a 3-week trial at the Washington County Courthouse in Hillsborough, Senior Deputy District Attorneys Allison Brown and Chris Luman presented their case. The trial demonstrated both the possibilities and the challenges of prosecuting a decades-old cold case. There were no witnesses to the crime itself. Much of the evidence was circumstantial. The DNA evidence, while significant, was not the clear-cut match that juries often expect from television crime dramas. Defense attorneys challenged the DNA analysis, arguing that the Oregon State Police Crime Lab had either gotten the analysis wrong or presented misleading results due to the complex technology that relies heavily on expert interpretation, far beyond an average juror's understanding. They pointed to alternative suspects and raised questions about the reliability of the forensic evidence. One defense attorney, April Yates, even suggested that another man, John Pearson, could have been involved. However, prosecutors countered that Pearson had an alibi and had fully cooperated with the investigation. Tragically, Pearson had died by suicide the week before the trial was originally scheduled to begin in October 2024, reportedly worried that police might blame him for the murder. Prosecutors focused on the totality of the evidence, emphasizing the timeline of events, the lack of anyone who could corroborate Robert's alibi, the domestic violence history, and the DNA findings. Brown told jurors that when they looked at all the information together, not just one specific piece, the state had proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. On April 17, 2025, after just 6 hours of deliberations, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of murder in the second degree. Robert Atrops, now 70 years old, had finally been convicted of killing his wife 37 years earlier. On July 8, 2025, Judge Oscar Garcia sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton emphasized that while people may think of these cases as old or used the word cold, for the families and friends of victims, they remain very current issues. They continue dealing with the trauma resulting from these crimes. The conviction of Robert Atrops brought a measure of justice and closure for those who had waited more than 3.5 decades for answers. The case stands as a testament to the power of persistence, the advances in forensic science, and the determination of investigators who refuse to let cold cases remain forgotten.
On a bitterly cold evening in January 1999, 17-year-old Nancy Noga finished her shift at the rag shop in Old Bridge, New Jersey. The high school senior pulled on her distinctive purple Arizona jacket, slung her purple backpack over her shoulder, and stepped out into the frigid night. She had a simple 15-minute walk ahead of her to reach her family's apartment in Saraville. It was a route she had traveled countless times before. But on this particular night, Nancy Noga would never make it home. When Nancy failed to arrive that evening, her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't like Nancy at all. She was a cautious young woman, responsible and reliable. Her family reported her missing on January 7, 1999, and the community of Saraville rallied together to search for the missing teenager. Flyers with Nancy's photograph were posted throughout the town. Volunteers combed the neighborhoods. But as the days passed with no sign of Nancy, hope began to fade into dread. 5 days after Nancy disappeared, on January 12th at approximately 8:57 in the morning, a man walking his dog made a devastating discovery. In a wooded area behind the Mini Mall Plaza shopping center on Ernston Road, partially hidden among the trees, lay Nancy's frozen body. The location was along the route she would have taken home from work. She was still wearing her purple Arizona jacket, her flared jeans, a dark V-neck sweater, and black and white platform sneakers. Her purple backpack remained on her shoulder. She had not been robbed. The autopsy would later reveal the brutal truth. Nancy had died from blunt force trauma to the head, struck with what appeared to be a tree limb. The temperature had been so cold that it took 2 days for her body to thaw before investigators could complete their examination. The murder of Nancy Noga shattered the quiet community of Saraville. At Saraville War Memorial High School, where Nancy was a senior just months away from graduation, students and faculty struggled to comprehend the loss. How could this happen to one of their own? Who would kill this young woman who had her whole life ahead of her? Investigators from the Saraville Police Department and the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office immediately launched an intensive investigation. They collected evidence from the scene, including DNA samples. They interviewed witnesses, followed leads, and worked tirelessly to find Nancy's killer. Detectives believe that Nancy likely knew her attacker. She was cautious by nature, not the type of person to willingly go with a stranger, especially on such a bitterly cold night. Even if someone had offered her a ride, investigators thought it unlikely she would have accepted unless she recognized and trusted the person. This theory suggested the killer might be someone from her community, someone who moved among them undetected. But despite the dedication of law enforcement, despite the preservation of DNA evidence, despite years of following every possible lead, the case went cold. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. Throughout Saraville, Nancy's case became a haunting reminder of justice delayed. Walk into the police department or many stores in town, and you would still see her face on flyers and posters on the walls, a perpetual plea for information. On the 12th anniversary of her death in 2011, investigators held a press conference reminding the public that the case remained active. Captain John Zabrowski emphasized that although 12 years had passed, the investigation was still very personal to them. They had never given up. They would never give up. Detectives retired and were replaced by new investigators with fresh eyes, but all remained committed to solving Nancy's murder. The breakthrough would finally come thanks to revolutionary advances in forensic science. As technology progressed, a technique called genetic genealogy emerged as a powerful tool for solving cold cases. This method involves uploading suspect DNA to public genealogical databases and using family tree research to identify potential matches through distant relatives. In 2019, the DNA profile from Nancy's case was uploaded to these databases, and genealogists began the painstaking work of building family trees and tracing lineages. The genetic genealogy work was conducted by C.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist for Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company that had helped dozens of law enforcement agencies solve cold cases. Moore and her team spent over 2 years working on Nancy's case, overcoming significant challenges in building the family trees that would ultimately lead them to a suspect. Their dedication would prove instrumental in finally bringing answers to a case that had haunted a community for more than 2 decades. In August 2021, 22 years after Nancy's murder, investigators finally had their man. Bruce Anthony Szymanski, a 49-year-old resident of Barnegat, New Jersey, was identified as the primary suspect through the genetic genealogy investigation combined with witness statements. When officers arrived to arrest him near his home, Szymanski attempted to flee, leading police on a brief foot chase before being apprehended. The DNA evidence preserved from Nancy's body all those years ago had finally found its match. Szymanski was indicted on devastating charges: first-degree murder, first-degree felony murder, first-degree aggravated sexual assault, first-degree kidnapping, and third-degree possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. Prosecutor Yolanda Ciccone stated that the advancement of modern scientific tools had allowed law enforcement's relentless pursuit of justice to enter a new chapter. At the time of Nancy's murder, Szymanski had lived in South Amboy and Old Bridge, areas in close proximity to where Nancy lived and worked. The case finally went to trial in October 2024, a quarter-century after Nancy's death. Over 3 weeks, Assistant Prosecutors Katie Magee, Alexander Batty, and Nicoletta Spalla presented the evidence against Szymanski to a Middlesex County jury. The prosecution argued that Szymanski had lured the teenage girl into talking with him, then sexually assaulted her and struck her in the head before leaving her to die in the freezing woods. The DNA evidence was compelling. The semen preserved from Nancy's body and underwear matched Szymanski's genetic profile. On October 17, 2024, the jury returned their verdict: guilty on all counts. Bruce Anthony Szymanski was convicted of first-degree murder, felony murder, aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Szymanski maintained his innocence. At his sentencing hearing before Superior Judge Joseph Pound, he addressed the court, claiming he could not provide answers for something he did not know, insisting that the real murderer was still out there. On March 17, 2025, Judge Pound handed down the sentence. Szymanski received life in prison with a mandatory 30-year parole ineligibility period for the murder. Additionally, he was sentenced to 20 years for kidnapping, to be served consecutively to the murder sentence, 15 years for aggravated sexual assault, and concurrent sentences for felony murder and weapons possession. In total, the sentences ensure that Bruce Szymanski will spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Nancy's family and the Saraville community, the resolution brought a measure of closure after 26 years of waiting. Prosecutor Ciccone thanked the law enforcement officers, both active and retired, from the Saraville Police Department, the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, the New Jersey State Police Office of Forensic Sciences, and the Barnegat Police Department for their unrelenting commitment to seeking justice for Nancy. The case stands as a testament to the power of persistence and the revolutionary potential of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases. Nancy Noga's childhood best friend, Lisa Walter Larraguio, expressed profound gratitude on social media for the investigators and genetic genealogists who solved the case. She recalled how, as a 16-year-old after Nancy's murder, she would spend nights at her computer trying to figure out who the killer was, long before Google became commonplace. She had been determined to solve it herself. Decades later, professionals accomplished what she could not, and her gratitude was immeasurable. The Nancy Noga case reminds us that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be achieved. It demonstrates how dedication, advancing technology, and the refusal to give up on victims can bring answers even after decades of silence. For Nancy, a young woman whose life was stolen on a cold January night, justice finally arrived, ensuring that her memory lives on and her killer faces the consequences of his crime.